After military, I came to New York, and I was going to Columbia, but my grades at Oberlin were so shitty I couldn't get into Columbia, so I got in on pull. The head of the music department, a wonderful man named Douglas Moore, got me in. And I got a master's at Columbia. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And then I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll get a PhD. But then I realized I have no language skills. And it would have been an extra 2 years to learn 2 languages. And I was living with my brother, who was at this point a failed playwright. We're all in our 20s, and Kander, who was not successful yet. He was giving voice lessons. And I realized I'd gotten a master's, and I wanted to be a writer. I'd shown no signs of talent. No one ever had the least notion that I would succeed as a writer. And I went back to Highland Park, and in a frenzy of 3 weeks, I wrote my first novel. And I remember so clearly, I was on page 50, and I'd never been on page 20 before because the short stories were all short. And I wrote the novel. I had met a guy in the Army who had met an agent. So I called up the agent, who was just starting, a wonderful man named Joe McCrindle. And I said, can I send you my novel? And he said, sure. He knew an editor at Knopf, and he sent the novel to the editor. And they had a very odd reaction to it. They said, we'll publish it if you'll double it in length, which was very strange. So I went frantic, and I doubled it in length and sent it back and was waiting to hear. Now, I'd never had anything published, ever, ever, ever. I had shown no signs of talent. And I got a phone call that morning. I was alone in the apartment in New York, that they had accepted the book. And Kander came home about 2 hours later, and he said, have you heard about the book? And I said, yes. And he said, and I said, they're going to publish it. And he said, oh, Billy, he's the only one who calls me Billy, isn't that wonderful? Is everyone thrilled? And I said, I haven't told anybody. And he realized I'd been walking around having a catatonic fit because I didn't know how to deal with this news. And Kander said, would you like me to help? And I said, how would we do that? And he'd say, well, we'll sit at the desk, and I'll call people and dial them and tell them your book was taken and that you don't want to talk about it. And you can say, isn't it wonderful? And they would say yes. And then we dial the next person. And that's what we did. We dialed everybody we knew and said, Billy's book has been taken. And that was how I started, and I still am staggered.